You know, 3D printing has this incredible promise, right? This idea that we can create literally anything we can imagine, from complex machine parts to, say, custom-fit safety gear. But there's always been this catch, a hidden flaw that's been holding it back from its true potential.
And really, the big question has always come down to strength. Can these beautifully intricate, custom-made objects really stand up to the same forces as parts made the old-fashioned way? When the pressure is really on, can they actually take a punch?
Because it turns out, under high-speed impact, we're talking the kind of force you'd see in a car crash or on an aircraft, most 3D printed plastics have a critical weak point. It's a secret vulnerability that researchers have been working like crazy to solve.
So to really get why the solution is so brilliant, we first have to understand the problem, and it lies at the very heart of how these objects are actually made. The source research paper we're looking at just nails it. Unlike a solid block of plastic that's molded all at once, 3D printing builds things layer by tiny layer, and the seams between those layers, these interlayer boundaries, well, that's the source of the weakness. They're basically natural fault lines, just waiting for the right kind of force to come along and tear them apart.
And this, right here, illustrates a fascinating paradox. If you take a chunk of traditional, solid plastic, a sideways shearing force can actually make the material tougher. But on a 3D printed part, that same shear force zeroes in on those weak layer boundaries and essentially unzips the material, causing it to fail way, way more easily. So how do you even begin to fix a problem that's literally built into the process itself?
Well, the researchers behind this study found a really clever answer. And it's not about changing the printer, it's about changing the plastic itself, by adding a kind of microscopic super ingredient.
So meet the hero of our story, silica nanoparticles. We're talking about unimaginably tiny spheres of glass, just 10 to 20 nanometers across. To put that in perspective, a single human hair is about 80,000 nanometers wide. So these are tiny. And when you mix them into the plastic, they work absolute miracles.
So why these specific particles? Well, it turns out they're a perfect match. They bond really well with the ABS plastic, they're totally stable at the high temperatures inside a 3D printer, and this is the most important part, they act like microscopic rebar. They physically get in the way of any cracks that try to form, forcing them to take a much longer, more difficult, and more energy-draining path through the material. And creating this superplastic is a really cool process. First, they dissolve the plastic pellets. Then they mix in the nanoparticles using some serious force, shear mixers and ultrasonic processors, to make sure they're spread out perfectly. Then they cast that liquid mixture into solid sheets, shred those sheets back into pellets, and finally extrude it all into the high-strength filament for the 3D printer.
And this visual shows you exactly why that intense mixing process is so critical. On the left, you can see the nanoparticles are spread out perfectly. They form this tough, winding maze that any crack would have a hard time getting through. But on the right, you see what happens if they clump together. They actually create new weak points in the material. So the dispersion is absolutely everything. Okay, so you've got a new material, but how do you prove it's truly superior? Well, you have to build a machine that's designed specifically to break it in the most precise and violent way possible. And this is it. This is the researchers' custom-built testing rig. It's this brilliant combination of a classic Hopkinson bar for generating really high-speed impacts and something called an Arkin fixture, which lets them apply very specific forces to tear the samples apart. It's a fracture machine, pure and simple.
Now, this machine tests for two main types of failure. Mode I is basically an opening force. You can think of it like pulling a zipper apart. And mode 2 is that shearing force, the one that tries to slide the two sides of a crack past each other. And you remember that shearing force, right? That's the one that's the real kryptonite for normal 3D prints.
You know, this new setup is just a huge leap forward. With traditional methods, it was really hard to accurately measure those high-speed impact forces, or to apply a pure shearing force. This new system solves all those problems, which means we get much cleaner, more reliable data on exactly how and when these materials break. So the stage is set. The materials are ready, the fracture machine is all warmed up, it's time to see the results. All right, 3 materials are stepping into the ring. First, we've got your standard, off-the-shelf commercial ABS. Second, a control batch of regular ABS that they made in the lab, just to make sure the process itself wasn't changing things. And finally, the star of the show, the new nanocomposite filament, loaded up with those silica nanoparticles.
Okay, first up, the slow loading test. This is like pulling the material apart very, very gently. And you can see the nanocomposite, that's ABS-NC in blue, is the toughest. But, it's not a massive difference. It's a bit better for sure, but this isn't the whole story.
Now, watch what happens when we switch to the high-speed impact test. The toughness of all the materials goes up a bit, but look at the nanocomposite. Its performance just skyrockets, leaving the other two completely in the dust. This, right here, is where those nanoparticles really show their power, under extreme, sudden stress. Let's just put a number on that, because it's pretty wild. The nanocomposite material showed a staggering 130% increase in its dynamic fracture toughness compared to its own performance under those slow, static conditions. That's a massive leap in its ability to resist a high-speed impact.
So 130% improvement in a lab is amazing, but what does this actually mean for the real world? Why should we care about this incredible breakthrough?
Well, this changes the game completely. All of a sudden, 3D printing isn't just for making prototypes anymore. We're talking about printing strong, lightweight, impact-resistant parts for actual aircraft and cars. We're talking about custom-fit helmets or protective gear that can withstand a serious real-world force. This tech unlocks applications where failure is simply not an option.
I think the ultimate takeaway here is that by thinking on the smallest possible scale, the nanoscale, we've managed to solve one of the biggest problems in manufacturing. It really makes you wonder, if tiny spheres of glass can do all this, what other microscopic ingredients are out there, just waiting to help us build the future?